Marcus Chen had always been confident about his physical abilities. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a lean but muscular build from years of casual gym workouts, he carried himself with the easy swagger of someone who had never really been challenged physically. His dark hair was always perfectly styled, and his expensive athletic wear suggested someone more concerned with looking the part than actually earning it. The idea to join the mixed martial arts class at Downtown Fitness hadn't been his own. His college buddy Jake had been raving about it for months, claiming it was the best stress relief after long days at their marketing firm. Marcus had finally agreed, mostly because Jake mentioned that several attractive women attended the classes, and Marcus was recently single after a messy breakup with his longtime girlfriend, Sarah. "You're going to love it, man," Jake had said over beers the previous Friday. "The instructor is this former UFC fighter, real hardcore stuff, and there's this one girl who comes regularly. Petite little thing, looks like she could barely lift a coffee cup. Perfect for beginners like us to practice with." Marcus had laughed, already imagining himself as the natural athlete who would quickly master the techniques and impress both the instructor and his fellow students. He had played football in high school, though only as a second-string player, and had done some weightlifting in college. How hard could martial arts be? That Tuesday evening, Marcus arrived at the gym 15 minutes early, wearing brand-new Nike gear that had cost him nearly $300. The martial arts studio was located in the basement level of the fitness center, accessible through a separate entrance. The space was larger than he had expected, with thick blue mats covering the entire floor and heavy bags hanging from reinforced ceiling mounts along one wall. Mirrors lined the other walls, creating the illusion of an even bigger space. A few people were already there, stretching or practicing basic movements. Marcus recognized the types immediately, the overly serious fitness enthusiasts who probably meal prepped on Sundays and tracked their macros religiously. He felt a familiar surge of confidence. These people took everything too seriously. Martial arts was supposed to be fun, a way to blow off steam, not some life-or-death endeavor. The instructor walked in precisely at 7 o'clock. David Rodriguez was shorter than Marcus had expected, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, but his presence filled the room immediately. His weathered face bore small scars that spoke of real combat experience, and when he moved, every step was deliberate and economical. He wore simple black shorts and a faded gray t-shirt that had clearly seen better days. "Good evening, everyone," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying easily across the room without seeming loud. "We have a few new faces tonight. This is a mixed-level class, so beginners will work with more experienced students. We'll start with basic warm-ups, then move into partner drills." Marcus glanced around, sizing up potential partners. Most of the regulars looked reasonably fit but not intimidating. There was an older man in his 50s who moved with surprising grace during the warm-up stretches. A young guy who couldn't be more than 20, all nervous energy and enthusiasm. Two women who seemed to know each other, chatting quietly as they prepared. And then there was her. She was stretching in the far corner, and Marcus almost dismissed her entirely at first glance. She couldn't be more than 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a slight build that made her look almost fragile under the overhead lights. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore plain black leggings and an old gray tank top that had seen many washes. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who was just going through the motions, maybe trying martial arts as a casual hobby. But something made Marcus look twice. Maybe it was the way she moved during her stretching routine, each movement flowing into the next with a fluidity that seemed almost unconscious. Or maybe it was the complete lack of self-consciousness in her body language. While everyone else, including Marcus himself, seemed somewhat aware of being observed, she appeared entirely focused on her own preparation. "Partner up for basic striking drills," Rodriguez called out. "New students, I'll assign you to work with someone experienced." Jake had paired off with one of the women, leaving Marcus to wait for assignment. He found himself hoping he wouldn't get stuck with the older man, who looked like he might move too slowly, or the over-eager young guy who would probably try too hard to show off. "Marcus," Rodriguez said, consulting a clipboard, "you'll work with Elena. Elena, come meet your new partner." The small woman in the corner looked up and walked over with easy confidence. Up close, Marcus could see she was probably in her late 20s, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. Her handshake was firm but brief. "Nice to meet you," she said simply. Her voice was calm and pleasant, with just a hint of an accent Marcus couldn't place. "How much martial arts experience do you have?" "Not much formal training," Marcus admitted, though he made sure to add, "but I've always been pretty athletic. Played football in high school, been lifting weights for years. I pick up physical stuff pretty quickly." Elena nodded without any particular reaction. "Okay, we'll start with basic stance and movement, then work up to light contact drills. The most important thing is learning proper form before you worry about power or speed." They moved to an open section of the mat, and Elena began demonstrating the basic fighting stance. Her feet were positioned at shoulder width, knees slightly bent, hands up but relaxed. When she moved forward and backward, her feet never crossed, and her balance seemed perfect throughout. "Your turn," she said, stepping back to give him room. Marcus mimicked her stance, feeling reasonably confident. He had good natural balance, and the position felt stable enough, but when he tried to move forward as she had demonstrated, something felt awkward. His feet wanted to come together, and he found himself slightly off balance after just a few steps. "Keep your feet wider," Elena said, moving closer to adjust his position. "Your center of gravity is too high. Lower your hips a little and don't bounce when you move." Her corrections were matter of fact, delivered without condescension, but also without excessive encouragement. Marcus found himself working harder than he had expected, just to maintain the basic stance while moving. After 10 minutes of footwork drills, he was already feeling a light sweat, which surprised him. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked during a brief water break. "About 12 years, Elena replied, taking a small sip from her water bottle. "Started when I was 16. Marcus felt a flicker of surprise. 12 years was serious dedication. He looked at her again, trying to reconcile her slight appearance with that level of experience. She certainly didn't look like someone who had been training in martial arts for over a decade. "What got you into it?" he asked, genuinely curious now. Elena's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Family tradition, you could say. My father thought it would be good discipline." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the story, but before Marcus could ask another question, Rodriguez called for everyone to return to training. "Now we'll work on basic punching technique," Elena said. "I'll hold pads, and you practice proper form. Remember, it's about technique, not power." She produced a pair of focus mitts from her gym bag and slipped them onto her hands. The pads looked well used, with tape repairs in several places, and the foam compressed from countless impacts. "Throw a basic jab," Elena instructed, holding up her left hand. "Step forward with your left foot, extend your left arm, turn your fist over at the last second. Don't just push, snap it back quickly." Marcus threw what he thought was a decent punch, but Elena shook her head immediately. "You're dropping your right hand when you punch with your left," she said. "Keep both hands up, and you're reaching too much. The power comes from rotating your body, not just extending your arm." They worked through the basic punches: jab, cross, hook, uppercut. Each time Marcus thought he was getting the hang of something, Elena would point out another flaw in his technique. His feet were wrong, or his hands, or his breathing, or the timing of his movements. It was frustrating in a way he hadn't expected. Marcus was used to being naturally good at physical activities. Sports had always come easily to him, and he had assumed martial arts would be the same. But this was different. Every movement had multiple components that all needed to work together, and Elena seemed to notice every mistake instantly. "Better," she said after his 20th attempt at a proper jab-cross combination. "You're starting to get the body rotation. Let's try it with a little more speed." As they continued the drill, Marcus began to notice things about Elena's movement that he had missed initially. The way she held the pads wasn't passive. She was constantly making tiny adjustments to give him the best targets. Her footwork was subtle but perfect, always keeping her in the optimal position to receive his strikes. And despite her small size, the pads barely moved when he hit them, as if she was somehow absorbing and redirecting all the impact. "Okay, switch," she said after another 15 minutes. "Your turn to hold pads." Marcus slipped on the focus mitts, immediately noticing how much heavier they were than he had expected. Elena took her stance, and he held up the pads the way he had seen her do it. "Just hold them steady," Elena said. "I'll go light." She threw her first jab, and Marcus felt like he had been hit by a sledgehammer. The impact traveled through the pad, up his arm, and into his shoulder. The pad flew backward, nearly pulling his arm out of position, and he had to take a step back to keep his balance. "Sorry," Elena said, though she didn't look particularly sorry. "I'll go lighter." Her next punch felt like half the power, but it still moved the pad more than any of his strikes had. Marcus tried to brace himself better, planting his feet wider and gripping the pads more tightly. It helped, but only marginally. As Elena worked through the same combinations they had been practicing, Marcus began to understand something that shook his assumptions about his new training partner. Every punch was perfectly placed, hitting the center of the pad with surgical precision. Her footwork was flawless, and there was never any wasted motion in her technique. Most unsettling of all, she was clearly holding back significantly, and even her restrained strikes carried more real power than anything he could generate. "How hard do you usually hit these?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Hard enough," Elena replied simply. "Power isn't really the point in training, though. It's about developing proper technique and timing." After they finished the pad work, Rodriguez called everyone together for the final portion of class, light sparring. Marcus felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. This was what he had really come for, the chance to see how his natural athleticism would translate to actual fighting. "New students will observe for the first few sessions," Rodriguez announced. "You need to develop basic skills before you're ready for contact." Marcus felt a stab of disappointment, but he nodded and moved to the edge of the mat with the other beginners. Jake was also sitting out, looking equally frustrated. Elena was matched with the older man Marcus had noticed earlier. Despite the age difference, they seemed evenly matched in terms of experience. As they began to spar, Marcus got his first real look at Elena in action. The transformation was startling. The calm, slightly reserved woman who had been patiently correcting his technique was gone, replaced by someone who moved like water and struck like lightning. She didn't seem to rush or strain, but she was always in the right position at the right time. Her opponent was clearly skilled, but Elena made him look slow and clumsy by comparison. She would slip his punches with minimal movement, often by just barely turning her body or moving her head a few inches. Her counterattacks were immediate and precise, landing cleanly before he could react. When he managed to throw a combination, she would interrupt it with a perfectly timed strike that broke his rhythm entirely. "Who is she?" Marcus whispered to Jake. Jake shrugged. "Just some girl who comes to these classes. Looks like she knows what she's doing, though." The sparring session lasted 5 minutes, and Elena never seemed to exert herself. She controlled the pace and distance throughout, landing strikes almost at will while avoiding nearly everything thrown at her. When Rodriguez called time, she wasn't even breathing hard. As the class ended and people began to pack up their gear, Marcus found himself watching Elena more closely. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she had shown all evening, rolling up her hand wraps and storing her equipment with practiced motions. "Good first class," she said, walking over to where Marcus was gathering his things. "You've got decent natural ability. Work on those basic movements we practiced, and you'll improve quickly." "Thanks for the help," Marcus said, meaning it. "Same time Thursday?" "I'll be here," Elena replied with a slight smile that was the first real warmth she had shown all evening. As Marcus drove home, he found himself thinking about the class more than he had expected. The physical workout had been more challenging than he had anticipated, but that wasn't what occupied his thoughts. It was Elena, and the growing realization that there was much more to his quiet training partner than her unassuming appearance suggested. He had always prided himself on being able to read people quickly, to size them up and understand what made them tick. But Elena remained an enigma. She had the skills of someone who had trained seriously for years, yet she carried herself without any of the ego or showiness Marcus associated with accomplished athletes. She had been helpful and patient with his beginner's mistakes, but there had been an underlying reserve that suggested depths he hadn't even begun to explore. Most puzzling of all was the contradiction between her slight physical appearance and the power he had felt when holding pads for her strikes. Marcus had been hit by plenty of people over the years. Football collisions, wrestling matches in college, even a few actual fights. He thought he had a good sense of what real power felt like, but Elena's restrained strikes had carried a focused intensity that was unlike anything in his previous experience. By the time he reached his apartment, Marcus had made a decision. He was definitely coming back on Thursday, and not just for the workout. Elena had awakened his curiosity in a way that had nothing to do with the romantic interest that had originally motivated him to join the class. He wanted to understand what made her tick, to discover the source of the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her small frame. What he couldn't know, as he fell asleep that night, was that Elena had been watching him just as closely. She had seen his type before, the naturally athletic man who assumed martial arts would be just another sport to master quickly. Most of them lost interest after a few weeks when they realized how much dedicated work was required to develop real skill. But there had been something in Marcus's eyes during the sparring observation that gave her hope he might be different. He had been paying attention, really watching and trying to understand what he was seeing. That was more than most beginners managed on their first night. Thursday couldn't come soon enough for either of them, though for very different reasons than either suspected. 3 weeks into his martial arts training, Marcus felt like a different person. The basic movements that had seemed so awkward during his first class now felt natural. His stance was solid, his footwork was improving daily, and his strikes were beginning to carry real power. More importantly, he was starting to understand the mental aspects of fighting, timing, distance, and the chess-like strategy of setting up combinations. Elena continued to be his regular training partner, and their working relationship had developed into something approaching friendship. She remained somewhat reserved, rarely sharing personal details, but she had begun to show a dry sense of humor that Marcus found surprisingly engaging. Her teaching style was patient but demanding, and Marcus had come to appreciate her honest feedback, even when it stung his ego. "Your left hook is getting better," Elena said during their Thursday session, holding the focus mitt steady as Marcus worked through combinations. "But you're still telegraphing it. Your shoulder drops slightly right before you throw it." Marcus nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I can feel it sometimes, but I can't seem to stop doing it." "It's muscle memory now," Elena explained, lowering the pads. "You've been practicing it wrong for weeks. Breaking bad habits is harder than learning good ones from the start." They had been working on the same combination for 20 minutes. Jab, cross, left hook, cross. Marcus could execute it smoothly now, with good power and reasonable speed. but Elena could still see the subtle tells that would allow an experienced opponent to counter effectively. "Let me show you," she said, taking off the mitts and handing them to Marcus. "Watch my shoulder when I throw the hook." Elena took her stance and began the combination in slow motion. Marcus focused intently on her left shoulder, trying to spot the telegraphing motion she had criticized in his technique. But her shoulder remained perfectly level throughout the entire sequence. When she sped up to normal pace, the difference was even more pronounced. Her left hook seemed to materialize from nowhere, with no warning signs at all. "How do you do that?" Marcus asked, genuinely impressed. Elena shrugged, a gesture that had become familiar over their weeks of training together. "Practice. Lots and lots of practice. Try it again, but think about keeping your shoulder up." As they resumed the drill, Marcus found himself studying Elena more closely than ever. Her technique was flawless in ways he was only beginning to appreciate. Every movement was economical and purposeful, with no wasted energy or motion. When she demonstrated techniques, it was like watching a master craftsman at work. Everything looked effortless, but was clearly the result of years of dedicated refinement. What puzzled him most was her apparent lack of ego about her abilities. Marcus had been around enough high-level athletes to recognize the swagger that usually came with exceptional skill. But Elena seemed almost embarrassed by compliments about her technique, deflecting praise and redirecting attention to areas where Marcus needed improvement. After class, as they were packing up their gear, Marcus decided to push for more personal information. "You mentioned your father got you started in martial arts," he said, trying to sound casual. "Is he a martial artist too?" Elena's expression tightened slightly, the same guarded look that appeared whenever the conversation veered toward personal territory. "He was. He's not around anymore." The way she said it suggested finality that had nothing to do with geography. Marcus sensed he was approaching sensitive ground, but his curiosity overrode his discretion. "I'm sorry," he said. "Was he your teacher?" "Among other things," Elena replied, her voice carefully neutral. She finished rolling up her hand wraps and stood to leave. "See you next week, Marcus." That weekend, Marcus found himself increasingly frustrated by Elena's secretiveness. He had shared plenty of details about his own life: his job at the marketing firm, his recent breakup with Sarah, his college football experience. But Elena remained a mystery, deflecting personal questions with the same smooth efficiency she used to slip punches. He decided to do some investigating on his own. Downtown fitness had been around for years, and the martial arts program had a long history. Someone there had to know more about Elena's background. On Saturday morning, Marcus stopped by the gym during off-peak hours, hoping to catch Rodriguez alone. The instructor was in the martial arts studio, working through forms with fluid precision. Marcus watched from the doorway for a few minutes, appreciating the artistry of Rodriguez's movements. "Marcus," Rodriguez said without turning around, "what brings you here on a Saturday?" "Just wanted to get some extra practice in," Marcus lied smoothly. "Maybe ask a few questions about training." Rodriguez completed his form and walked over to where Marcus stood. Up close, the instructor looked older than he did during evening classes, and Marcus could see more of the small scars that marked his face and arms. "What kind of questions?" "Well," Marcus began carefully, "I've been working with Elena for a few weeks now, and she's obviously very skilled. I was wondering about her background. How long has she been training here?" Rodriguez studied Marcus for a long moment, his dark eyes revealing nothing. "Why do you want to know?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "I'm just curious. She's a great training partner, but she doesn't talk much about herself. I thought maybe understanding her background would help me learn from her better." "Elena's background is her business," Rodriguez said firmly. "What I will tell you is that she's one of the most dedicated students I've ever taught. She shows up, works hard, helps others, and doesn't cause problems. That's all you need to know." The instructor's tone suggested the conversation was over, but Marcus pressed on. Has she ever competed? She moves like someone with real fight experience. Rodriguez's expression hardened. Leave it alone, Marcus. Focus on your own training. The warning was unmistakable, but it only intensified Marcus's curiosity. There was clearly a story behind Elena's reserved demeanor and exceptional skills, and everyone seemed determined to keep it secret. During the following week's classes, Marcus found himself watching Elena with new attention. He began to notice details that had escaped him before. The way other students, even experienced ones, gave her extra space during group exercises. How Rodriguez never had to correct her technique or remind her of safety protocols. The unconscious deference even Jake showed when Elena was nearby. Most telling was her behavior during the sparring sessions Marcus was finally allowed to observe up close. Elena never seemed to exert herself fully, but she dominated every exchange with casual ease. She could apparently dial her performance up or down at will, giving her training partners exactly the level of challenge they could handle. With beginners, she moved slowly and focused on technique. With advanced students, she increased the pace and complexity while still maintaining perfect control. She's like a teacher disguised as a student, Marcus confided to Jake over lunch on Friday. There's something about her that doesn't add up. Jake laughed. Dude, you're overthinking this. So what if she's been training longer than most people? Not everyone feels the need to brag about their accomplishments. But Marcus couldn't let it go. Elena had become a puzzle he was determined to solve, and her continued evasiveness only made him more persistent. The breakthrough came during their 4th week of training together. Marcus had been working on defensive techniques, slipping, ducking, and blocking incoming strikes. Elena was throwing slow, controlled punches that he was supposed to avoid or deflect. The drill was designed to develop reflexes and timing, with emphasis on smooth, economical defensive movements. Marcus was feeling confident, his reactions were getting faster, and he was beginning to anticipate Elena's strikes before they were fully developed. When she threw a slow jab toward his face, he slipped it easily and countered with his own jab, pulling it short just inches from her chin. Good, Elena said, resetting to throw another slow strike. But keep your hands up after you counter. They continued the drill, with Marcus growing more confident with each successful defense. He was beginning to feel like he was really getting the hang of this martial arts thing. His natural athleticism was finally starting to show, and even Elena seemed impressed with his progress. Let's try it a little faster, Elena suggested after several minutes of the slow-motion drill. I'll throw at about half speed, and you react normally. Marcus nodded eagerly. He had been hoping to move beyond the beginner-level exercises, and this felt like real progress. Elena's first strike came faster than Marcus expected. A straight right hand aimed at his chest. He managed to slip it, but his counterpunch was late and off target. Her second combination was a jab cross, and Marcus could only avoid the first strike before the second one tagged him lightly on the shoulder. Faster than you thought, right? Elena said with a slight smile. Speed changes everything. Your brain has less time to process what's happening. They continued the half-speed drill, with Marcus gradually adjusting to the increased pace. After 10 minutes, he was doing much better, slipping most of Elena's strikes and landing occasional counters. His confidence began to return, along with a growing sense that he was finally becoming a real martial artist. Not bad, Elena said during a water break. You're starting to see punches earlier, before they're fully developed. That's the key to good defense. It feels good, Marcus admitted, like things are finally clicking. Elena nodded, but something in her expression suggested she was evaluating more than just his defensive technique. Want to try something a little different? Sure, Marcus said immediately. He was riding high on his recent success and eager for new challenges. Let's work on some close-range stuff, Elena said. In real situations, fights often end up at close quarters where the techniques are different. I'll show you some basic clinch work. She moved closer, demonstrating how to control an opponent's arms and head when fighting at close range. The techniques required more physical contact than the striking drills, with emphasis on leverage and positioning rather than speed and power. The key is control, Elena explained, showing Marcus how to grip behind his opponent's neck while keeping his elbows low. Size and strength matter more in close quarters, but technique can still overcome physical advantages. Marcus found the clinch work more challenging than expected. The techniques seemed simpler than the striking combinations they had been practicing, but actually executing them against resistance was surprisingly difficult. Elena was much smaller than him, but she consistently managed to control his positioning and break his grips with minimal effort. "You're using too much muscle," she said after Marcus had struggled unsuccessfully to maintain a dominant position for the third time. "This is about leverage and timing, not strength." Marcus reset and tried again, this time focusing on technique over power. He managed to secure a good grip and felt like he was finally controlling the position. Elena felt solid in his grasp. And for the first time since they had started training together, he felt like his size and strength were giving him a real advantage. "Better," Elena said, not struggling against his grip. "Now try to move me toward the corner of the mat." Marcus began to push forward, feeling confident about his position. Elena moved with him initially, seemingly off balance and unable to resist his forward pressure. This was what he had been waiting for, a technique where his physical advantages actually mattered. That's when his confidence got the better of him. Instead of maintaining the steady, controlled pressure Elena had been teaching, Marcus decided to assert himself more dramatically. He gave her what he thought was a playful but firm nudge with his shoulder, trying to demonstrate his growing comfort with the physical aspects of training. It was not the gentle tap he had intended. In his enthusiasm, Marcus put real force behind the nudge, the kind of contact that would barely register in a football practice but was completely inappropriate for a technical drilling session with a training partner half his size. Elena's reaction was instantaneous and far beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. The world suddenly turned upside down, literally. Marcus felt himself leaving the ground with shocking speed, his feet flying above his head as Elena somehow transformed his forward momentum into rotational force. The ceiling spun past his vision, followed by the fluorescent lights, and then he was crashing down toward the mat with devastating impact. But the mat wasn't there anymore. Elena's throw had been so powerful, so perfectly executed, that Marcus sailed completely through the thick foam mat as if it were tissue paper. His body hit the concrete floor beneath with a sickening thud that seemed to echo through the entire gym. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and sent shock waves through every bone in his body. For several seconds, Marcus lay motionless in the Marcus-shaped hole he had created in the gym's flooring, staring up at the ceiling and trying to process what had just happened. Around the edges of the torn mat, he could see faces appearing, other students and Rodriguez himself, all staring down at him with expressions of shock and amazement. Elena appeared above him, extending a hand to help him up. Her expression was calm and apologetic, as if she had just corrected a minor technical error rather than launched him through the floor. "Sorry about that," she said simply. "I should have warned you. I don't like being pushed around." As Marcus grasped her hand and allowed himself to be pulled upright, he realized that everything he thought he knew about his quiet training partner had just been proven completely wrong. The question was no longer who Elena really was, but what she was capable of when someone crossed the line. And judging by the perfect Elena-shaped hole in the gym floor, Marcus was beginning to suspect he had been training with someone far more dangerous than anyone had ever let on. The silence in the martial arts studio was deafening. 23 people stood frozen around the edges of a hole in the floor where Marcus had disappeared moments before, their faces displaying various degrees of shock, amazement, and concern. The thick training mat lay in tatters around the impact site, its foam stuffing scattered like snow across the surrounding area. Marcus slowly pulled himself upright, Elena's surprisingly strong grip helping him find his balance on the uneven concrete surface below floor level. Every part of his body ached, but nothing seemed permanently damaged. His pride, however, was completely destroyed. What the hell just happened? Jake whispered from somewhere above, his voice carrying clearly in the stunned quiet. Rodriguez was the first to recover his composure. He knelt at the edge of the hole, examining both the damage and Marcus's condition with practiced efficiency. "Are you injured?" he asked, his tone professional but concerned. "I think I'm okay," Marcus replied, though his voice came out as more of a croak. He tested his arms and legs, finding everything functional despite the bone-jarring impact. "Just really confused." Rodriguez extended his hand and helped pull Marcus completely out of the hole. As soon as he was back on mat level, the full extent of what had happened became clear. The floor mat wasn't just torn, it was obliterated. The force of his impact had compressed the foam beyond recovery and cracked the concrete underneath. It looked like something had been dropped from a significant height, not thrown by a woman who barely came up to his shoulder. "Elena," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone that Marcus couldn't identify. "We need to talk." Elena nodded without surprise, as if she had been expecting this conversation for some time. "I know. I'm sorry about the damage." "The damage is the least of our concerns," Rodriguez replied. "Everyone else, class is over early tonight. Clean up your gear and head out. Marcus, you stay." As the other students gathered their belongings with unusual haste, Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations that only deepened his confusion. "Did you see how high he went?" "Through the floor, man. Through the actual floor." "Who is that girl?" Jake approached Marcus with concern written across his face. "Dude, are you sure you're all right? That looked like it should have killed you." "I honestly don't know," Marcus admitted, still trying to process what had happened. "I barely pushed her, Jake. It was like being hit by a truck." Jake glanced over at Elena, who was standing calmly near Rodriguez, apparently unaffected by having just launched a man twice her size through a concrete floor. "Maybe we should take you to a hospital. That was not a normal human reaction." "I'm fine, physically," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure that was entirely true. "But I think I'm going to need some answers." Within 10 minutes, the studio was empty except for Marcus, Elena, and Rodriguez. The instructor locked the door and turned off most of the lights, leaving only the emergency lighting to illuminate the scene. The damaged floor looked even more dramatic in the dim light, like a crime scene waiting for investigation. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and made a brief call in rapid Spanish that Marcus couldn't follow. When he finished, he looked directly at Elena with an expression that mixed disappointment with resignation. "How long did you think you could keep this quiet?" he asked. Elena shrugged, the same gesture Marcus had seen dozens of times over the past month, but now it carried a different weight, suggesting depths of experience and capability that he was only beginning to understand. "I thought maybe I could just be a regular student for a while," she said simply. "It's been nice, training without everyone watching every move I make." "Regular students don't put people through concrete floors," Rodriguez pointed out, "and they especially don't do it by accident." Marcus looked back and forth between them, feeling like a spectator at a conversation in a foreign language. "Would someone please explain what's going on? Who are you, Elena?" Elena seemed to consider her words carefully before answering. "My full name is Elena Santos. I've been competing in mixed martial arts professionally for 8 years. My record is 37 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw." The numbers hit Marcus like a physical blow. 37 professional wins meant Elena wasn't just experienced. She was elite. At the highest levels of the sport, most careers were measured in single digits for total fights. 37 wins represented nearly a decade of consistent success against world-class competition. Santos, Marcus repeated slowly, the name triggering a memory he couldn't quite access. That sounds familiar. It should, Rodriguez said. Elena is the current flyweight champion of the International Fighting Championship. She's been the champion for 3 years running. The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Marcus. Elena Santos, the ghost of Guadalajara, the undefeated flyweight who had dominated her division with a fighting style that emphasized technique over power. He had watched several of her fights on television, though the cameras had never captured the quiet intensity he now recognized from their training sessions. "You're the ghost," Marcus whispered, using her fighting nickname. "You're Elena the Ghost Santos." Elena winced at the nickname. "I never liked that name. The media gave it to me because I supposedly disappear from my opponent's attacks and make them look foolish. But it stuck." Marcus sank down onto one of the undamaged sections of mat, his mind reeling. For the past month, he had been training with one of the most accomplished fighters in the world. She had been patiently correcting his amateur mistakes and allowing him to think he was making impressive progress, when in reality, she could have dismantled him in seconds at any point. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why were you here, pretending to be just another student?" Elena sat down across from him, her expression softening slightly. "Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to just love martial arts again, without all the pressure and politics and media attention. David's gym has always been a sanctuary for me, a place where I could train without being Elena Santos the champion." She paused, looking down at her hands. "My last fight didn't go well. I won, but barely, and it was ugly. The media started talking about me losing my edge, wondering if I was getting too old to compete at the highest level. My management team wanted me to take easier fights to rebuild my image. I just wanted to step away from all of that for a while." Rodriguez nodded understandingly. "Elena's been training here since she was 17, long before she became famous. This has always been her home gym." "But why didn't anyone tell me?" Marcus asked, feeling somewhat betrayed by the deception. "Because she asked us not to," Rodriguez replied. "Elena wanted to work with students who would see her as just another training partner, not as a celebrity or a curiosity. It was supposed to be therapeutic for her." Marcus looked at Elena with new eyes, trying to reconcile the quiet woman he had been training with for a month with the legendary fighter he had watched on television. The pieces fit together now, her perfect technique, her ability to control the pace and intensity of every drill, the way she could seemingly read his intentions before he fully formed them himself. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly. "I know the deception was unfair to you, but training with you has been exactly what I needed. You treated me like a normal person, not like a champion or a commodity. That's been more valuable than you can imagine." Marcus tried to process his emotions. He felt embarrassed by how completely he had misread the situation, but also oddly honored that someone of Elena's caliber had chosen to spend time helping him improve. Most of all, he felt a deep respect for her that had nothing to do with her fighting credentials. "The way you've been helping me," Marcus said slowly, "always patient, never making me feel stupid for asking basic questions, that wasn't just good teaching. That was kindness." Elena smiled, the first completely unguarded expression Marcus had ever seen from her. "Teaching helps me remember why I fell in love with martial arts in the first place. When I'm showing you proper technique, I'm reconnecting with the fundamentals that made me successful." "Plus," Rodriguez added with a slight grin, "you've been good practice for her. Elena tends to train mostly with other professionals who can match her skill level. Working with a genuine beginner has forced her to slow down and really examine the building blocks of good technique. Marcus laughed, though it came out somewhat shaky. So I've been like physical therapy for a world champion? That's actually pretty cool. Now that I think about it. The door to the studio opened, and a man in a suit entered, carrying a clipboard and looking distinctly unhappy. Rodriguez's phone call had apparently summoned some kind of official. "Facilities manager," Rodriguez explained quietly. "We need to figure out what to tell him about the damage." The manager surveyed the destruction with professional detachment, making notes and taking photographs. When he finished, he turned to the three of them with an expression that suggested this was not his first unusual incident. "So," he said simply, "what happened here?" Rodriguez and Elena exchanged glances, apparently having a silent conversation about how much to reveal. "Training accident," Elena said finally. "I threw my partner a little harder than intended during a demonstration. I'll cover all the repair costs, plus any inconvenience fees." The manager looked from Elena to Marcus, to the hole in the floor, clearly trying to calculate the physics of the situation. "You threw him through a concrete floor?" "It's a very old floor," Elena replied diplomatically, "and the mats were due for replacement anyway." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. Elena was discussing the complete destruction of the gym floor as if it were a minor mishap, like spilling coffee on someone's shirt. The manager completed his paperwork and left, apparently satisfied with Elena's promise to handle the financial consequences. Rodriguez began the process of cordoning off the damaged area and making arrangements for emergency repairs. "What happens now?" Marcus asked Elena as they gathered their gear. "Now I go back to being Elena Santos the fighter," she replied with a hint of sadness. "My manager has been calling all week about a potential title defense in Las Vegas. I can't put off my real life forever." Marcus felt a surprising sense of loss. Over the past month, Elena had become more than just a training partner. She had become a friend and mentor whose quiet wisdom had improved not just his martial arts skills, but his entire approach to learning new things. "Will you keep training here?" he asked hopefully. Elena considered the question. "Probably not regularly. Too much risk of exposure now, but maybe occasionally for special sessions." She paused, studying his face. "What about you? Are you going to keep training now that you know your patient beginner's instructor was actually humoring you the whole time?" Marcus thought about it seriously. The revelation of Elena's true identity had shattered his ego in ways he was still processing, but it had also shown him just how much room he had to grow. If anything, knowing that he had been learning from one of the best fighters in the world made him want to work even harder. "Definitely," he said with conviction, "though I'm going to have to completely readjust my expectations about how good I thought I was getting." Elena laughed, a sound Marcus realized he had rarely heard during their training sessions. "You were getting good, Marcus. Really good. Your natural athleticism combined with proper technique makes you formidable for someone with just a month of training. Most people take years to develop the kind of timing and distance management you've picked up." "Really?" Marcus asked, needing the reassurance after having his worldview completely restructured. "Really? You have good instincts, and you listen to instruction. Those are the two most important qualities in a martial artist. Everything else can be developed with practice." Rodriguez finished his emergency repairs and joined them near the exit. "Elena, I want you to know that you're always welcome here, regardless of your professional status. This place exists to help people grow as martial artists, and that includes helping champions remember why they love the sport." Elena hugged the older man briefly, displaying more emotion than Marcus had ever seen from her. "Thank you, David, for everything." As they walked out to the parking lot, Marcus found himself looking at Elena with completely new eyes. She moved with the same quiet confidence she had always displayed, but now he understood that it came from a place of absolute competence rather than simple self-possession. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said as they reached their cars. "Sure. When I pushed you, that throw you used on me, was that just a reflex? Or did you choose to launch me through the floor?" Elena's expression became thoughtful. "A little of both. The throw was absolutely a reflex. I've been training defensive reactions for so long that they're completely automatic now, but the force behind it was emotional." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've spent most of my adult life dealing with men who think my size and gender make me weak or vulnerable. Usually they learn better through proper channels, watching me fight, sparring with me under controlled conditions, but sometimes someone crosses a line and they get educated more dramatically." Marcus winced. "I crossed a line." "You did," Elena agreed simply, "but not maliciously. You were just being playful in a way that felt disrespectful given our size difference. In my world, that kind of assumption about what I can and can't handle has to be corrected immediately." Marcus nodded, understanding more about Elena's background than just her fighting credentials. The quiet reserve he had noticed wasn't shyness. It was the self-protection strategy of someone who had learned to be careful about revealing her capabilities until absolutely necessary. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely, "not just for pushing you, but for underestimating you from the beginning." Elena smiled, extending her hand for a final handshake. "Apology accepted. And Marcus, next time someone tells you that size and strength don't always determine the outcome of a physical confrontation, maybe believe them." As Marcus drove home, he reflected on everything that had happened. His body still ached from his unplanned trip through the gym floor, but his mind was processing lessons that would stay with him far longer than any physical discomfort. He had learned that assumptions about people's capabilities could be not just wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. He had learned that true skill in any field came with a humility that made practitioners less eager to show off, not more. Most importantly, he had learned that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones who didn't look dangerous at all. Over the following weeks, Marcus continued his martial arts training with renewed dedication and dramatically adjusted expectations. He never again made assumptions about any training partner based on their appearance, and he approached every lesson with the kind of respect Elena had always deserved. Rodriguez occasionally mentioned that Elena was doing well in her professional career, and Marcus followed her fights on television with the unique perspective of someone who had experienced her abilities firsthand. She retained her title twice more over the next year, cementing her legacy as one of the greatest flyweight fighters in history. Marcus never forgot the lesson Elena had taught him, both through her patient instruction and her dramatic demonstration. In martial arts, as in life, the most profound teachers were often the ones who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, except occasionally to overconfident marketing executives who made the mistake of thinking they could push around the ghost of Guadalajara. The hole in the gym floor was repaired within a week, but the legend of what had happened there lived on in whispered conversations among the students. It became a cautionary tale about respect, assumptions, and the importance of really listening when someone tells you they know how to fight. And sometimes, late at night when Marcus was having trouble sleeping, he would remember the moment of Elena's throw with perfect clarity, the instant when physics, technique, and years of professional training had combined to send him flying through solid matter. It remained the most educational few seconds of his entire life.